Welcome back to World History. Today we uncover the real story behind the rise of the French Empire, one not just of conquest, but of vision, ambition, and global transformation. Our journey begins in the fiery heart of revolution. Picture a young Napoleon Bonaparte standing defiantly in his military uniform amid the chaos of burning streets and stormy skies. The French Revolution had torn apart the old monarchy, and from its ashes rose this brilliant Corsican commander. His tactical genius quickly caught the eyes of revolutionaries, and he became a symbol of hope and power in a time of complete disorder. As Napoleon's influence grew, so did the reach of the French military. In a show of overwhelming strength, French imperial troops marched triumphantly through conquered European cities. Civilians lined the cobbled streets, watching in awe as the tricolor flags waved high. The message was clear. France was no longer just a republic, it was becoming an empire. Then came the defining moment. In a scene etched into history, Napoleon crowned himself emperor at Notre Dame Cathedral. The image of Pope Pius VII reluctantly blessing the ceremony revealed it all. Napoleon bowed to no one. This wasn't just a coronation. It was a declaration of absolute power. France was now under the command of a ruler who would reshape the continent. The empire's ambitions didn't stop on land. As the Napoleonic Wars raged, massive French warships cut through the dark waters of Europe, asserting control over the seas. The French fleet set sail into conflict after conflict, fighting not just for victory but for dominance over trade routes, alliances, and imperial influence. Few battles capture the scale of Napoleon's genius like Austerlitz. Under a cold winter sun, French forces shattered the mighty coalition of Austria and Russia. The battlefield was frozen, but the fire of strategy burned bright as Napoleon led his army to one of history's most stunning victories. Not long after, the world witnessed an unlikely scene: Napoleon and Tsar Alexander I signing the Treaty of Tilsit on a raft in the middle of the Niemen River. Enemies turned negotiators. Both men tried to carve Europe into spheres of influence. It was the height of French imperial diplomacy, where war gave way to strategic domination, but power always seeks more. By 1830, French forces were landing on the shores of Algeria. Stunned locals watched from the coastline as towering warships unleashed columns of troops onto North African soil. The empire was expanding, not just in Europe, but far beyond. The same brutal pattern followed in Vietnam. Deep in dense jungle terrain, French soldiers clashed with fierce native resistance. It was the beginning of a long and painful conquest, as France pushed deeper into Southeast Asia in its quest for colonial riches. Back home, the empire reshaped its capital. Under Napoleon III, Paris transformed wider boulevards, gaslit streets, and grand industrial-era buildings emerged from the once medieval maze. It was more than urban planning. It was a statement. France was modern, powerful, and the heart of a new European order, and far from the city lights, French engineers were sweating under the desert sun, carving the future into the sand. Suez Canal, a marvel of engineering, this canal would become a gateway of empire, linking east and west and tightening France's grip on global trade. In the heart of Indochina, French missionaries stood as symbols of cultural dominance. Surrounded by native children, they taught language, religion, and European values. But in the background, tension simmered. This was not education, it was erasure. The silent resistance of local families reflected a deeper truth. The French Empire wasn't just building structures. It was dismantling centuries-old traditions. Empire demanded not only loyalty, but sacrifice. And no image captures that cost, like Napoleon's fateful march into Moscow. Snow fell like ash on the starving, frostbitten troops retreating from a city that had burned itself to deny him victory. The dream of Russian conquest turned into a nightmare, and thousands of soldiers were left buried beneath the ice of a failed ambition. But the lessons of Moscow didn't stop the empire's expansion. In Mexico, French soldiers once again found themselves on foreign soil during the Second French Intervention. Guerrilla fighters, fueled by passion and national pride, met them in the rugged mountain terrain. For every step the empire took forward, fierce resistance pushed back proof that occupation did not always equal control. Long before these global campaigns, the fire of revolution had been lit at home. The storming of the Bastille still echoed. In every revolution France inspired, as armed crowds tore down the prison walls, the old world cracked open. But the irony of empire is that even revolutionaries, once in power, can become oppressors themselves. In lavish offices filled with maps, globes, and exotic trophies, French colonial administrators plotted the future of Africa. Lines were drawn, not by native rulers but by European pens. Tribes were split, cultures erased, and resources claimed, all while the architects of empire sat comfortably. Far from the suffering they orchestrated, back in Europe, Napoleon III stared at his map of the continent with unease. His portrait reveals a man caught between ambition and fear. The empire he inherited was fracturing. Defeat loomed on every border, and his grip on power was slipping through his fingers. That fear became reality at Waterloo. Mud, smoke, and blood turned the battlefield into a graveyard of imperial dreams. French banners fell, not just in the hands of soldiers, but in the hearts of those who once believed in the invincibility of France. The empire began to crumble under its own weight, yet even as it collapsed, control lingered. In West Africa, French troops enforced their rule through chains and silence. Tribal leaders were captured, paraded as warnings, while entire communities stood in quiet defiance. These were the costs of power, human, cultural, irreversible. As war raged again in the Franco-Prussian conflict, French soldiers huddled in trenches beneath a blood-red sky. The empire had become a battlefield, and the dream of dominance bled out in the mud and fear of modern warfare. But from this devastation, something new began to rise. Iron beams pierced the Parisian sky as the Eiffel Tower took shape. It was no longer just a symbol of engineering, it was a monument to resilience. Though the empire had fallen, France refused to disappear. What emerged from the ruins was not another emperor, but the idea of a new republic, determined to rise again. In candle-lit war rooms deep within imperial France, generals huddled over maps of Asia and Africa. The flickering light danced across plans for domination, strategic ports, mineral-rich regions, trade routes waiting to be seized. These weren't just military plans. They were blueprints for reshaping the world in France's image. Colonial expansion wasn't ending, it was only beginning to reach its peak, but amid the strategy and conquest, there was also spectacle. A royal family portrait of Napoleon and Josephine, draped in rich empire-style fashion, captured the height of imperial grandeur. The scene was luxurious, calculated, and political. The image of stability, unity, and divine right cloaked a world ruled by war and fear. Behind the smiles was a throne built on conquest. Zooming out, the empire's reach becomes clear. An aerial view of the French colonies shows a web of dominance stretching across the globe, each territory marked with gold, spices, rubber resources extracted through blood and fire. It was not just control of land, but of economies, cultures, and futures. Yet, wherever France planted its flag, resistance took root. In Algeria's rocky terrain, local fighters launched ambushes on French forces. They moved like shadows, fueled by fury and desperation. The French might have claimed the land on their maps, but the people who lived there fought back with everything they had. Not all battles were fought with bullets. In grand courts across Asia, French naval officers negotiated dominance with powerful emperors. These meetings were filled with ceremonial respect, but behind every bow was the pressure of imperial power. Diplomacy was often just another form of conquest. In the Sahara Desert, French legionnaires marched under the unforgiving sun. Their helmets gleamed, their boots crushed the sands, but the land never truly belonged to them. It was vast, brutal, and indifferent to empire. Yet still, they marched on orders, for glory or for survival. Meanwhile, far from the battlefield, French ships burned in Egyptian waters. British cannons tore through the hulls, sending fire and chaos into the sea. The empire's naval dreams turned to ash. It was a reminder that even the greatest fleets can be sunk. and that no power is eternal. And behind the glory lay one of the darkest truths: the trade of enslaved Africans under French colonial rule. Human lives reduced to property, overseen by uniformed soldiers. It was exploitation masked as civilization, cruelty masked as order, yet the empire wasn't just war and wealth, it reshaped the cultures it touched. In Morocco and Madagascar, French fashion, language, and architecture began to influence local life. Streets lined with French-style buildings, colonial schools, and imported customs were lasting reminders of a foreign rule that changed everything, and not always for the better. Finally, beneath the golden dome of Les Invalides lies the tomb of Napoleon. His sarcophagus glows under dramatic shadows, silently watched by generations. Here rests not just a man, but an idea, the dream of empire, the cost of ambition, and the memory of power that once dared to command the world. The French Empire may have collapsed, but its story is far from over. Its legacy lives on in borders, cultures, and scars, forever written into the fabric of world history.